GIAN course on responsible research and innovation. And thank you for being here, bearing with me. Although I thought that we should start with a summary by Anup from Saturday, but if he has audio problems, then we might as well jump in. And once those audio problems are solved, then we can see it, whether we want to continue with that. So, as usual, I will start sharing my screen, and then we can turn to the presentation of today. You should be seeing full screen. I hope you do. And today, I will want to round off our discussions and offer at least one of the relevant ways in which responsible research and innovation, as I see it, is trapped in an old way of thinking. Therefore, it is a policy object that is very fragile, as I described it last time around. So this is our beginning of the project of reframing responsible research and innovation in order to make it work, rethinking the ontological assumptions. And now I hope it will be clear for you why I started as I started in the 17th century, and also arguing that science, research and innovation, as we know it, is a ontological construct, but a specific ontological construct, that which is also a political ideology. If it's so, then the ontological assumptions, and now I hope it will be clear for you why I started as I started in the 17th century. Okay, I heard myself in an echo, so that's why I stopped. Sorry for that. Anyways, so I'll offer some trajectories of rethinking the ontological assumptions that may, I hope, help to understand how we can. Can you please mute yourself? Yes, thank you. How we can rethink RRI for the future. So, what I'm trying to connect RRI discourse to, I'll offer some trajectories of. I again hear myself. This is very strange. Why do I hear myself as an echo? Okay. Sorry for this. So what I'm trying to connect this to is the so-called ontological turn, mainly in anthropology and in STS, that's in Science, Technology and Society Studies, and see how this ontological turn, which obviously I'll describe, may be useful for rethinking responsible research and innovation as well. As you remember, our definitions, and this will be important for today because I'll redo, hopefully, the definition that is better fit for our purposes. Anyway, just to recap, RRI is a transparent interactive process by which social actors and innovators become mutually responsive to each other with a view of ethical acceptability, sustainability, and social desirability of the innovation process. What we like the most, taking care of the future through collective stewardship of science and innovation in the present. And the definition I'll work with is RRI that implies social actors working together during the whole research and innovation process in order to better align both the process and its outcomes with the values, needs and expectations of society. And this is where we will be starting. State of RRI, as we said, is a fragile policy institution. And we argued, or I argued last time around, that RRI debate focuses on the policy aspects. This is using Sabatier's concept of advocacy coalitions, on the policy aspects of RRI instead of fundamental normative and ontological axioms that should be reflected upon in our current time, that is the Anthropocene. Remember, 30 Years' War, religious conflicts, disorder and superstition, the destitution, the insecurity, and the alternative knowledge trajectories that need to be killed led to the emergence of science, arguing that the grand book of the universe was written in the language of mathematics, and to avoid precipitancy and prejudice, and to include judgments nothing more than what presented itself scientifically, and to be responsive to the continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man that was seen as solitary, poor, and nasty. Science emerged as an ideology and also as a political hierarchy. So what we need to focus our attention to, I argued, is this political ideology or this political hierarchy that is science. Science is not what is, my mother would say, an objective representation of reality, or my father, who is a scientist, would think that it is a yet incomplete tool to represent the universe as is, and through appropriate methods, that is mainly verification or falsification, one will eventually arrive or potentially arrive at a complete and total perfect representation of what the universe, or in the language of philosophy or ontology, the real is. And when I say that we need to rethink our basic normative and ontological assumptions, this is exactly what I mean. What I mean is that we need to rethink such ontological assumptions that science is a tool, complex as it is, to arrive at a complete and perfect representation of what the real or the universe or the laws of the universe are. And there is out there a number of trajectories that may help us rethink science as we know it. This is from what we call the WEEK program of STS, Science and Technology Studies. And the WEEK program aimed at decentering the object, the thing that is the artifact, and understanding the thing or the object, that is the object of technology, as something that is embedded in the social. It was criticizing determinism. Determinism, as you know, technological determinism, basically stemming from science and then applied science, understanding engineering or technology as a applied science. So technological determinism was taken to comprise two basic claims. One, that technology develops autonomously, and also that technology determines social development to an important degree. So Science, Technology, and Society Studies and its WEEK program emerged as a critique or criticism, partly stemming from the critical traditions that we've been talking about, that emerged at the late 19th and throughout the 20th century, starting as Siddharth has pointed out, from Nietzsche onwards through Marx and others. They were criticizing this technological determinist approach that argued that technology was developing autonomously and that it was technology that determined the social and not the other way around. And this led to what's called the social construction of technology. And the social construction of technology understood that the development, the stabilization, and even the working of a technology is socially constructed. And the emphasis is on the social as opposed to the technological. And the social construction of technology argued that in such construction, key concepts are the relevant social group or groups, interpretative flexibility, closure, and stabilization. And the unit of analysis was the single artifact, that is the tool, the device, the machine. Within my universe of research, the bicycle, for instance, which was obviously seen as an extremely complex technology. Biker wrote a beautiful book on the emergence or the social construct of the bicycle, emerging from the hobby horse of the 18th century, in which the irrational and hard to control horse was substituted as a pleasure or entertainment activity with a mechanical device that was the early bicycle. It was called hobby horse, and how the use of this hobby horse led to different technological trajectories, the development, how the high and the low, the two and the three-wheeled bicycle emerged, and then in the 19th century, how this bicycle then was developed to incorporate separate and different social groups, including women, with their dresses, or rather with what they were coerced into wearing and how they were coerced into behaving. And so what is argued there, that these relevant social groups and also the interpretative flexibility that was offered had a core and key role in developing the technology as we know it, that is the bicycle. Another trajectory in the week program was what's called the social co-production of technology, mainly heralded by the STS group at Harvard University, led by Shaila Jasanoff, arguing that imagined form the social life and social order that center on the development and fulfillment of innovative scientific and technological projects lead the way to the development of specific technologies. And in this, imagined forms of social life are obviously related to social imagination. It's not the unreal, but it is the real in social or sociological terms. And this led to arguing by Jasanoff and Kim in her or their famous study in 2009, and then repeated at more general level in Dreamscapes of Modernity in 2015. What became the word socio-technical imaginaries that are shared visions performed and institutionalized, and how these shared visions that are performed and institutionalized then form and determine the social being of technologies. In their case, first it was nuclear, the difference in these performed and shared visions in South Korea and the US, and then later by a professor from the University of Vienna in Austria. In South Korea, nuclear energy was seen as a source of innovation, power, development, and progress, whereas in the US it was seen as risk, as danger. And obviously these led to very different public perceptions, but also to very different use and very different types of technologies within the nuclear energy business. Interestingly enough, the same public performances and imaginaries in Austria, the place where I live, led to a total and complete ban of nuclear energy. There are no nuclear reactors in this country. And there was even a referendum in 2004 that banned nuclear energy. To relate it to current events, obviously this ban, as in Germany, was or is being re-evaluated in light of the war that's happening near between Russia and the Ukraine at the moment, and how decades of cheap Russian gas and the perception of Russian gas as a cheap and unsophisticated but unrisky or non-risky alternative to nuclear energy coerced Europe into a certain connection and role with Russia that now becomes extremely problematic. So all these concepts have been working with the assumption that the social and the natural, or the social and the technological, are closely and intimately intertwined. And moreover, not only are they intertwined, but the traditional trajectories of science, applied science, and then technological innovation, and they're impacting society or the social, may have a reverse causality in which the technological is as much determined or co-produced by the social as is the social co-produced by the technological. What's interesting in these trajectories of STS thought is that while decentering the object that is the artifact, it is not questioning the basic tenets of modernism or modernist science, which center around a differentiation of the social and the natural, or the subjective and the objective, the human and the non-human. Thus, the argument of these streams of thought were arguing that the natural and the social are more intertwined than traditional science would like to have it. However, it did not question the basic ontological assumptions that we in this discussion are referring to. However, what is called the strong program in science, technology, and society studies that has emerged in the late 20th, early 21st century. Three different trajectories that I will be bringing to your attention. The strong program have questioned these basic ontological assumptions of traditional modernist science, arguing that one needs to decenter also the subject, that is the human. And these three strands are actor network theory, vital materialism, and object-oriented ontology. I would assume that you must have heard about actor network theory, which is the most prevalent of these theories, emerging partly inspired by Heidegger and Deleuze, famous philosophers of pre-war and post-war period, heralded mainly by Bruno Latour, French sociologist, but also by people like Anna-Marie Moll in the Netherlands or John Law in the UK, and many others. So actor network theory, which, as Latour famously has argued, is neither about actors nor is it about network, or more importantly, nor is it theory. Anyways, it argues that the world consists of networks, because what they were looking for, or what Latour was looking for, is action, and thus action is located not in or with the human, but was located in networks, and such networks mainly originating from Deleuze and Guattari's concept of rhizomes, but also Foucault's concept of discourse. Such networks include humans, things, ideas, concepts, all of which are referred to as actants in the network. And the role of the social, in bracket, scientist, or the scientist, is tracing such associations of or relationships between network components or actors and actants. And this is the key activity that an actor network theorist would do. And the sum of non-social phenomena can account for something that is social as a result of constellations of human and non-human actors consisting of the network. He speaks about the parliament of things. Somebody asked this question, whether what I'm alluding to is in close or family resemblance to Latour's concept of the parliament of things, and my answer was yes. So actor network theory claims that one needs to be doing away with modernist concepts, binaries mainly, like nature, culture, or nature social divide. Also, do away with another philosophical binary, that is epistemology and ontology. There would be a difference between human knowledge, human reflection, and the universe or reality as something being out there. Actor network theory, however, argues that every such network is performative. And while there may be, or there are, multiple networks that are multiple ontologies, such networks only are multi-stable. They would dissipate once the performance or the locus of the performance is not there anymore. So such ontologies are rather temporal concepts, or temporal networks, temporal entanglements that would disband once some of the elements would change. However, there are such elements that are actants that may be mutable or immutable mobiles. The famous example, the water pump in Zimbabwe, Annemarie Moll's research project, in which she showed that the technology, that is the water pump in Zimbabwe, takes different forms, and these different forms still hold together a network that is helping or creating life in Zimbabwe. And these are not different technologies, but they are what she called mutable mobiles. That is the actant nature of the water pump, while on the appearance changes, the network and the role in a actor network does not. And so such mutable mobiles are relevant, as they may change their material or semiotic form. They may still be part of a similar network. There are also immutable mobiles. Immutable mobile would be John Law's famous example of the Portuguese vessel. And this is obviously relevant for India, because he was investigating how was it possible that the Portuguese, a small, tiny little country, could control such huge parts as a colony of India over time. And what he came up with in his famous paper on long distance control is that it was such a network of multiple actants that enabled and empower, part of which stemmed in the modern science of the 16th, 17th centuries, that created a network that was able to extend Portuguese power over the immutable mobile that was the Portuguese vessel. That was a specific tool that was carrying not only people, not only things, but also rule and knowledge to the then colonies, and also was taking back things, and this network together was able to exert political power that was long-term control. So this is one of the inspirations we can look for, actor network theory, to rethink the framework of responsible research on innovation, or science research and innovation that is our object of study. Vital materialism is another pretty similar trajectory of thought, again, stemming from the philosophy of Deleuze in the 1960s in France. Deleuze and then Bennett, and protagonists of the vital materialism movement, argue that humans are viewed as always imbricated within networks of other humans, but also of non-humans, and forces are generated. So not only action or agency, but other vital forms are generated in and through humans' relationships with non-humans. Therefore, non-humans become much more important agents or forces within such networks as actor network theory would suggest. And living things, as well as non-living, argue vital materialists, matter, or things possess agency that can work with, or indeed against, the agency possessed by humans, and together generate new forms of agential capacities. Therefore, this is something that Donna Haraway would subscribe to in her theory of cyborgs, arguing that it is not the subject nor the object that possesses agency, as an actor network theorist would argue, but it is some form of confluence coming together in the form of a cyborg that will create together a new form of agential capacity. In my corner of the wood, mobility in general and automobility, I would argue that it is not the car, nor the driver, nor is it the passenger that is at the core of the agential capacity of automobility, but it is what I call the car driver hybrid or cyborg, if you will. That is the core key agent within the automobility social order. So I would argue along the lines of vital materialists that it is the confluence of a technology, that is the car, and the human, that is the driver, that has a specific type of agential capacities. Why is this relevant? This is relevant, for instance, when accidents and the causes of accidents are discussed. Current research in what's called accident causation sees these agential capacities as separate, therefore would argue and look for the cause within one of these objects of investigation. Therefore, when looking at accidents, accident causation would look either as culprit for the technology, that is the car, or the environment, that is everything else out of the car and the driver, or looking for the driver being at fault in cases of what I call automobility violence. And interestingly enough, traditional or accident causation theory finds 93% of the time the human being at fault in such cases. I think that this does not make sense. And from my perspective, which is near to how a vital materialist would argue, when you want to discuss automobility violence, traditionally called as accidents, automobility violence, the agential capacities should be looked for with the combined force of things involved in automobility, the car, for instance, and the human that is together with the car creating what I call the car driver hybrid and the agential capacities that the car driver hybrid has. Obviously, this has other implications as well. Others within this universe that is automobility have different agential capacities. The bicycle driver or the bicyclist hybrid, and then one can look at the political hierarchy and even the ontological hierarchy that is created by the different agential capacities related to violence within automobility, but this takes far. And then a third source of inspiration would be what's called object-oriented ontology. Graham Harman being its main proponent, but there are others who are arguing that object or the essence of objects are withdrawn. Therefore, what we live in as an ontology is something that is only amongst different objects, but they are only addressable through our sensory capacities. Objects' essence are withdrawn, and we only experience sensual objects, of which the human is also one. So object-oriented ontology is exploring the reality, the agency, and the private lives of non-human and non-living entities, all of which are considered objects. So humans and non-humans are all objects. And in a object-oriented ontology, anthropocentric ways of thinking about and acting in the world are rejected. Thus, every object has agency, but only in its relational capacity. So similar to actor network theory or vital materialism, it looks at an ontology that is relational. What differentiates object-oriented ontology from vital materialism or actor network is a much bigger emphasis on the relationality of such object relationships. And while actor networks also place the emphasis on the network, that is the relations, as Latour famously argued, there is a certain unsymmetry in the different agential capacities of actors and actants, humans having the leading roles. In vital materialism, this is reversed, arguing that material objects may have a bigger influence on our relationship or on the human, non-human relationships than previously assumed. And object-oriented ontology argues that one needs to do away with an essentialist understanding of objects, even if such objects may be human, and place all the emphasis on the relations and the relations only. Morton also came up with the concept of meta objects. In his world, climate change, for instance, is a meta object. In my corner of the woods, automobility is a meta object. Therefore, when you address problems of automobility, then it is not the car or not the driver, not even the car driver, which is one privileged type of relationship that is the object of reflection, but it is the relation, the complex, multifaceted, rhizomatic relationships embedded within automobility as a separate and a separate ontology within our multi-ontology world. I don't want to claim that any or all of these philosophies have more currency than the other. I think that all the three may serve as an inspiration to the paradigm change that we have been talking about, this paradigm change being and meaning that the traditional ontology of science or the traditional binaries of the human, non-human, science, social or science, culture, such binaries can be, should be done away with. And these theories or philosophies may serve as inspiration for this new paradigm to emerge. Here are some examples from a previous course of mine that I gave here at the technical universities, and these were questions that students posed when I argued that okay, this is vital materialism and object-oriented ontology is very nice, but when you talk about responsibility, one student said, how can you compare life with non-life? He asked, isn't life better than non-life? And then I alluded to the famous philosophy of Giorgio Agamben, questioning what is life. Obviously, from Aristotle onwards, we know two different understandings of what life is, Zoe and Bios. Zoe being what is colloquially called biological life, that is a function of living, breathing, bodily heat, and so on, whereas Bios being a way of life or meaningful life, political and ethical issues for mankind, bravery, cowardry. So Zoe is the biological fact of life, whereas Bios is the form of or the manner in which life is meaningfully lived. The question then is, which life is better than non-life? Or rather, which life, Bios or Zoe, is animated by what we colloquially call technology? And we argue I argue, for instance, that within automobility, humans are reduced actually by the violence that is constitutive, are reduced to Zoe as opposed to Bios. They are reduced because it is contingent when violence befalls upon them. They are reduced to a function of living as opposed to being in control and leading a political or meaningful life. So trivial questions like, is life better than non-life, are complicated to answer within this new ontology that I am proposing. Another question emerged in a class of mine. You're talking about automobility and you suggest that automobility is a complex of multiple agencies, human and non-human, but in the end of the day, automobility is man-made, isn't it? One student asked. And I answered that automobility is a prime example of such network or assemblage that actor network theorists or vital materialists speak about. As Bennett says, by vitality, she means the capacity of things, edibles, commodities, storms, metals, not only to impede or block the will and design of humans, but also to act as quasi-agents or forces with trajectories, propensities, and tendencies of their own. And I think this is very much the case in automobility. Automobility offers objects or things, vitality, not only the car, but its parts, not only cars, but also infrastructures. All of these within the network or within the assemblage are quasi-agents that have forces with trajectories, propensities, and tendencies of their own. And then a mathematician who was part of that course asked the question, okay, this is all nice, but what do you mean by the saying that the book of the universe is not written in the language of mathematics? It's so clear. 2.2 is always 4, isn't it? And he wanted to ask something extremely trivial and something that is extremely well accepted across the board. And then I quoted two of the famous physicists of the quantum era, Mario Liviu and Wolfgang Pauli. Liviu argues, and this is a beautiful example, this is a silly idea, he suggests, Imagine an isolated jellyfish. Imagine that all the intelligence resided not in humans, but in this very isolated jellyfish at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. This jellyfish, he argues, Liviu, all she would feel would be the pressure of the water, the temperature of the water, and the motion of the water. Do we think that this jellyfish would think in numbers, in natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on? Liviu suggests that this is a stupid idea because there is nothing to count in the world of the isolated jellyfish. Everything that the isolated jellyfish would feel would have been continuous rather than discrete, as natural numbers would suggest. So the creature might have invented a completely different type of mathematics than that which we have today, which is filled with natural numbers and discrete entities. Or, as Wolfgang Pauli argues, actually, strangely enough, there are two totally different mathematical worlds. One is the realm of symplectic geometry, a branch of mathematics that underlies much of mechanics, for instance. And there is another type of mathematics, the realm of algebraic geometry, the world of complex numbers. And quoting a famous letter from 1926 by physicist Heisenberg, who invented or who found quantum theory, Heisenberg in this letter argued that, quote, one can see the world with a PI or one can see it with a QI. But if one opens both eyes, then one becomes crazy. That means that these two types of mathematics, symplectic geometry and algebraic geometry, are totally incommensurable. They're two different worlds. So even the universe that's written in the language of mathematics is written in two different languages. And these two different languages are absolutely non-compatible. So, you remember, I started with a quote by Heidegger. This quote went the following: from time to time, one has the feeling that violence has long been done to the thingliness of the thing, and that thinking has had something to do with this. What Heidegger alluded to was representational thinking, the separation of the subject, that is the knowable subject, the knowing subject, and the object being the world or the universe out there. Not only was this biased, representing thinking the subject who thinks representing the world, placing obviously the European, the knowing, the white male human at the center of this world, but this white European male was also worldling. He was worldling a world and thus not allowing the world to world as the world would. This is what Heidegger alludes to as the violence of thinking. So, where are we? We are, as you remember from the advocacy coalition, we said that there are exogenous factors that would inform change, changing the ontological imaginary. Climate change is hyper-object, as I have alluded to, the ontopolitics of Anthropocene, decentering the human, but more importantly, a reference to the deep core, the fundamental normative and ontological axioms that drive science and that drive research and innovation. Therefore, what we need is a change of belief in the system as such. Research and innovation, a human activity, not offering solutions, but as Haraway argues, living with the trouble, accepting that we're one of many. There are multiple ontologies, and we should be way more careful than we are today. So, to round off, what I suggest as a new definition for responsible research innovation is that RRI implies that social actors work together during the whole process in order to better align both the process and its outcomes with multiple forms of being and human, non-human entanglements in the Anthropocene. So what I'm arguing that instead of responsibility, which is a core humane concept, I suggest living with trouble or care, pretty much along the lines of Heidegger. Care as accepting multiple forms of being and taking care of human, non-human entanglements. And when we talk of democracy, we do not talk about human democracy, but we do talk about the democracy within the Parliament of Things, in which things, humans included, are embedded in a relational ontology. Therefore, it is such relations that we need to pay attention to, and also care needs to be taken to other forms of being, not only the human, but also the non-human and their entanglements. So, when the world welds, as Heidegger would have it, it's not the human that thinks, but it is all thing that thinks. And therefore, we should not privilege our thinking, that is thinking, over others' thinking, that is not thinking. So, what we need to do away with is this violence that has done a lot of harm to the ability of things to think and the world to world. And if we do so, then, if you want to follow this line of argumentation, we will take care of the future in the present. Thank you. Questions? I'll stop sharing. Now you should have the full picture. Anyone? Do you hear me now? I seem to have technical problems. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. For some reason, I can't turn on my camera, so please bear with me. Anyone, any questions?
Robert,
Yes.
I was just curious that this thing about, recognizing the agency of other things. It is a project which
Of things, just things, yes.
is a project which is, requires the substitution of our view of things with the view of the thing in itself. So how would such a view be constituted? Means I've read something to this effect, but it always baffles me to other than animals, or like if we extend this to other categories like plants, or other forms of ontological forms, how would we allow them to be separated for the purposes of moral agency? This is the thing which I get confused about.
I think this is the core question. Maybe we could step back one. And these conceptualizations, especially vital materialism and object-oriented ontology, argues that even what you just said, that there are different forms of life and non-life, are of our making. So the real question is not how we as humans can imagine how other worlds that are seen or constituted by these other forms are, but actually no such other forms exist other than what's embedded in the relationships. So also what you called as the other is of our making. And a very trivial example would be that, imagine this virus that is now causing the pandemic. We, with our ontology, that is science, think or create the virus as another. The virus is an ontological entity that is another. What a vital materialist would argue that there is no such thing as virus, as there is no such thing as human. There are only cyborgs, that is a human, non-human entanglement, in this case, virus human, or another type of entity that is a complex of the virus and all what is the human. And when we try to understand the agential capacity, we should try to understand the agential capacity of this cyborg that is the complex of the virus and what we currently call the human. Does this make sense?
Yeah, seems to be a little more clearer.
And obviously this is not only relevant for the virus and the human, but everything else. Everything else is such a complex. And thus, the question then becomes not how to imagine the moral or other agency of these human-created others, but how to imagine an ontology that is the entanglement of multiple actants or multiple agenциal setups in extremely complex distribution or dispersal. And while this world becomes extremely complicated and complex, that shouldn't hinder us from trying to imagine it, and definitely trying to imagine our role within. Okay, anyone else, any questions? Go ahead, because unfortunately I do not see your hands. Do you hear me?
Yeah, Abhinandan raised his hand.
Okay, go ahead then, because as I said, I have some technical problems. I don't know why.
Am I audible to you, Richard?
Yes, you are.
Okay. No, I was just thinking that when you say regarding, say, for example, you give the example of virus and humans. This is just a thought that, in fact, even within a human body, there are presence of microorganisms. But then why there is a need to separate the microorganisms from the human beings?
I wouldn't separate.
Yeah,
I think
because,
this is the traditional ontology of the medical sciences that separates. I think this is another great example that you're just bringing to our attention, that what we conceive as the human is a much more complex entity than traditionally imagined.
yes.
And this complexity is not only the complexity of entanglement of what we think the human is and what science tells us that these other entities that are not on the outside but are on the inside of what we imagine as the human. But I think what we're trying to say is, within this radical frame of ontology, is that this is not even relevant. Because this is also our own construct. And we don't even know how much these entanglement of that what we call a microorganism and what we call a macroorganism, that is the human, where the agency lies. And I think the virus is an example, a great example once again, that clearly an entanglement that entangles the virus with humans, not only one human and one virus, but multiple viruses in different agential forms that we separate as Delta variant and Omicron variant, and multiple humans across the globe have caused a totally different type of life to live that we call pandemic. Different social relations, different types of work. I can't be in India for one, etc., etc. So all these are helping us examples to show that our traditional ways are maybe a violent thinking that does not do justice to the thinking of things, and is a violent intervention by humans.
Thank you. No, in fact, what make me thought about this is that in our school days, whenever we have been taught about biology, one of the question was that, do you know about a bacteria which lives in your intestine? The answer is, what is that bacteria? Sorry, what is that? What is the microorganisms? Well, it's called anti-amoeba histolytica, which is responsible for creating blood dysentery, which sometimes gets viral. Sorry, became more injury. So the interesting part is that it's an amoeba, which is actually a unicellular microorganism which try to live in the intestine of humans. And at the same time, a human being is being given an example of a multicellular organism. So that's what it actually make me thought to come up with this question. That is why I asked this. Thank you.
Thank you. If one can fully agree with a question, then I fully agree with the question. And this is another good example of a traditional scientific ontology. Okay, let's have a break of 10 minutes. So my time, it's 12:10. What time is it in India?
16:40.
16:30. So let's meet at 4:40. Okay, and continue
No,
with the.
sorry, 4:41 now. 4:51 maybe.
4:51. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. 4:51 then. Okay. So 10 minutes. Simple. 10 minutes rather. Okay. I'll log off, and Anu, please let me in. I will try to see what the technical problem on my side is. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Loud and clear.
Okay, that's excellent. For some reason, my Zoom does not detect my camera, so I won't be able to see you, and you will not be able to see me.
Okay.
But I'll try to share my screen.
Okay.
And let's see, hopefully, that whether it works. I do hope that it does. Okay, so let's see. Do you see my screen?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's visible now.
Excellent. Okay, so at least some things work. Maybe not all things. Okay, so this is a tutorial. It will be a little bit of a jump, but not that big. I want to talk to you today about methods. The theme for today is the social lab. But before we jump into the social lab concept, I want to talk to you about what's called action research. I don't know if this is something that is familiar to you guys. Who has heard about action research? And since I don't see you, you have to verbally tell me if you have heard about action research, so then I can calibrate what I say. So who has heard about action research as a research method? Has anyone? Go ahead. Has anyone heard about action research? Okay, it seems that nobody is responding, so I take that nobody has heard about action research. So action research is a research methodology that is a form of what's called a self-reflective inquiry undertaken by participants in a social institution in order to improve rationality and justice of their own practices, their understanding of these practices, and the situations in which these practices are carried out. So it is a research method. However, it's practice oriented. It's participatory in the sense that it blurs the differentiation between research, researcher, and research subject. It originates from a theory by Kurt Lewin in the 20s and 30s, an educational psychologist who argued that the research needed for, and I'm quoting now, the research needed for social practice can best be characterized as research for social management or social engineering. It is a type of action research, as he called it, comparative research on the conditions and effects of various forms of social action and research leading to social action. Research that produces nothing but books will not suffice. So action research, as you see, is a research oriented towards the social management or social engineering, as Kurt Lewin called it. It is an attempt to do research that leads to social action. And it involves what's called spiral steps, each of which is composed of a circle of planning, action, fact-finding about the result of the action. So it's an iterative process of doing research, identifying a general idea, trying to understand, fact-finding as he calls it, then planning action, taking steps in action, evaluating that action, redo the plan, and take a second step. So it's a cyclic or a spiral form of doing research in which the core is the self-reflection that is reflecting on the social situation in order to understand one's own and others' practices that inform that specific situation with the ambition for change. Okay, now I stop sharing my screen and I want to go and do a Kahoot because you seem to like Kahoot. So I have prepared a Kahoot. Let me just quickly bring it up on my screen. Here it is. Let me start it. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Do you see the pin?
Yes.
Go ahead then. You know the trick. So log on. I now understand that I should run the Kahoot from here, and you'll give the answers on your own screen or phones or whatever tablets you have in front of me. So please log on. Tanya has logged on. Excellent. That's great. So please log on. Others? Ashish has logged on. Excellent. So please, Pune. Excellent. We only have 4 people yet, so please, others, come. Join us. Okay, we have 11 people logged on yet, and we're 26, so please, others, join. You're so honest. You're giving your own real name. That's funny. It's great if you only give an avatar or a nickname, whatever is quick. We have 13 people signed up. I said we're 26, so please, others, join us.
So can you reshare the pin, please?
You should see the pin.
Able to see.
You're not able to see. How is that possible? You're not seeing my screen?
Oh, it's disappeared.
I'll read it out. It's 807 9934.
Do you see it now on the screen? Do you see it on the screen now?
Yeah, we can see
Okay.
it.
Okay, good. Today, technology is not our best friend. Okay, we have 15 people, so a few more, please, and then we can start. Okay, so If nobody else is joining, we lost someone. If nobody else is joining, then let me start. So 3, 2, 1, go. This is our Kahoot for today. 3, 2, 1 again. Let's see. It's 8 questions. 8 questions. First question, scientific knowledge is created by observation only, experiments, or any method that is accepted by the scientific community. Correct. It's both observation and experiments, but more importantly, it's any method that is accepted by the scientific community. We have learned this from Polanyi, the Republic of Science. It's a self-governed republic. So whatever the science community accepts is good enough. This is why we said that this is a political ideology. It is the political ideology of the republic that is made up of scientists. So 8 people got the answer right, and the fastest apparently was MK. Congratulations, but this is the early stage of the game. So next question. I hope you're prepared. Let's go. True or false? This is a different way. You only have to answer true or false. The question or the statement is, only scientists may generate scientific knowledge. Is this true or false? It is false. Thank you so much. This was a tricky question, but you did not fall into the trap. Absolutely not. Not only scientists may generate scientific knowledge, but scientific knowledge may be anything that anyone accepts within the scientific community. So it is obviously not only scientists, but other stakeholders do create and can create scientific knowledge. And this is leading us to what I call action research. So congratulations to you, 13. Let's see next. MK is still in the lead. So next question up. It's again multiple choice. Lay people have a role in research. They are research subjects, they're knowledge holders, or as potential partners in doing research, or all the three. Seven people got it right. However, 5 people also understood the core, the thrust of the question, as lay people may be potential partners in doing research, but they're also research subjects, and they are also knowledge holders because they are research subjects. So 7 people have got it right. Let's see where we are. Shelley took over. So it's a real great competition. Tanya is the highest climber. So next question up. It's a quiz question again, number 4. Scientific research is based on a scientific method, based on observation and or experimentation by researchers. It is based on multiple methods, including co-creation with research subjects. Anything goes until results are measurable. Anything goes is not the correct answer, although the majority thought it is. I think anything goes, but not necessarily that are measurable only. Actually, scientific research is based on multiple methods, including co-creation with research subjects. So the 3 people who chose this answer. Got it right. Let's see the scoreboard. Shelley's still in the lead. Tanya is up. MK is up. Let's go on to question number 5. Observing social practices is the topic of anthropology only, sociology only, any social science, or all knowledge is based on social practice. All knowledge is based on social practice. I'm proud. Thank you. I'm proud of you, but a little bit proud of myself because this is what I have been trying to explain. All knowledge is based on social practice. One of these social practices is doing science. Doing science is not an investigation into objective reality, but it is a specific form of social practice that we associate with the creation of human knowledge. Excellent. 8 people got it right. Perfect. Thank you. So, Shelley is in the lead, MK and Tanya following up. Unfortunately, I see that there are chat messages, but I don't see them. So if they're relevant and important at this point, please read them out.
ISA said that I got disconnected. After reconnecting, I am unable to do the quiz.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry for
So
that.
should I share the code again?
Yes, the code is 807 9934. 8079934.
Yeah, I entered.
Excellent. Okay. Next question up. It's number 6. Experiments aim for reproducibility and generalizability, application of proper methods, verifying or falsifying a hypothesis, or aid reflection to find barriers and obstacles in tackling a problem. Almost. You are still very scientific. Verification, traditional scientific description, or falsification, the version of Karl Popper, is at the core of a traditional understanding of a representationalist idea or empiricist idea of what science is. Again, a hypothesis is obviously a humane construct, and science traditionally understood. There's world out there, there's the human, that is the knowable subject, or the knowing subject, sorry. The role of science is to either verify or falsify a thought experiment of a reflection on that reality out there. However, action research suggests that actually experiments aid reflection to find the barriers and obstacles that may help towards social change. As we heard from the quote from Kurt Lewin, verifying or falsifying a hypothesis that results in a book is not enough. We should aim for social change. That's what action research suggests. So the 2 people who got it right, thank you very much. So MK is up. Very, very interesting competition. So comes the penultimate question. This is a quote. If you want truly to understand something, try to change it. The quote is from Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, or Kurt Lewin. Thank you very much. For those who chose Kurt Lewin, obviously this was a tricky question, not that tricky actually, because yes, this is a core quote from what Kurt Lewin suggests, that understanding is actually changing.
Huh? Okay.
Those who suggested Marx were not that wrong, because we know the Feuerbach thesis, and even Nietzsche suggests something similar. So obviously Kurt Lewin did not come up with his ideas in total exclusion, but relies on both Marx and Nietzsche. However, this quote from Kurt Lewin is the one that was asked. Okay, so last question. Before the last question, let's see the scoreboard. MK's in the lead, Shelley and Tanya runners up. So, last question. What is social action? Which definition is correct? An act which takes into account the actions and reactions of individuals, or behaving in such a way that an action is intended to influence others, or it's about people coming together to improve their lives or solve a problem. 9 people got it absolutely and perfectly right. It's all the above. The first, obviously, is a Weberian, Max Weber's definition. An act, a social act, is something that takes into account the actions and reactions of different individuals. Talcott Parson definition is behaving in such a way that an action is intended to influence others. This is the basis of a social systems theory that Talcott Parsons forwarded. And Kurt Lewin suggests that social action is about people coming together to improve their lives or solve a problem. So thank you very much. I hope you also had fun. Here is the podium. 6 questions right. Tanya, congratulations. Also 6, but quicker. Shelley, and 7 out of 8, congratulations. Absolutely great. MK, congratulations. With runners-up Sid and Priyanka. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you very much. I stop sharing and reshare my presentation. Do you see my presentation full screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Why not yet?
Only Kahoot is visible.
Only Kahoot is really okay. How about now? Do you see it now?
No, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
You can make it
Excellent.
full screen.
I can make it full screen, definitely, if it's not. You see full screen?
Not yet.
I don't know what's happening to the technology today. Absolutely a mess.
No.
How about now? Do you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
No, not in full screen mode.
That can be helped. Now full screen?
Not yet.
Still not?
No.
Okay, I don't know what's going on.
Okay, we can carry on with this.
Now?
Oh no, no, it is not shared.
You should be
Yes, sir. Now
seeing
it
it now.
is full screen, sir.
Full screen, excellent, at least. Okay, so there are different types of action research, participatory, empirical, and experimental. Name says it all. Participatory action research is including those who are affected by a problem. Empirical action research is trying to test certain empirical action and reflect on it. And experimental action research is doing experiments to reflect.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. Sir, your voice is echoing.
Am I echoing?
Yes, sir.
Okay, as said, apparently the technology
Now
is not-
perfectly fine, sir.
No, perfectly fine. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, anyway, so let's go to the next slide. So this is the types of action research we have. So this is a process. Action research process is action, reflection, action, reflection, action, reflection. So here is a case, action to establish a common agenda with stakeholders, collectively decide on the issues, problem, reflect on research design, the ethics, the knowledges, and the accountability of the research, then start the action, identify roles and responsibility, do the research design and select the tools, discuss potential outcomes, then go back and reflect on the research question, the design and the relationship, and also the information gathered, and then redo action, work together, enable participation of all members, collectively analyze findings, and plan future action. Go back, reflect, working together. How does it go? Has participation worked? What else is needed to be done? And then again, replan action. So this is how action research is happening. One method that we have developed is called social labs. And social labs are specific participatory action research that tries to combine all the three types of action research. It has participation, it has an empirical focus, but also does experiments and reflects on them. So, what is a social lab? A social lab is a container of social experiments for addressing complex, groundbreaking social challenges on a systemic level. So there's a team, there's a process, there is a space or spaces supporting the social innovation and experimentation. We invite a number of actors that we think are relevant for the social lab process. And then there are three independent iterative activities. One is a diagnosis of current practices, designing and implementing social experiments, and then reflecting on the outcomes of such experiments and learning lessons for further experimenting and future embedding of this into policies and funding programs, for instance, if we're talking about research and innovation. So social labs are spaces that facilitate this process: diagnosis, design and implementing of social experiments, and reflection. And it takes an iterative process in which the diagnosis, the design, and the reflection is then redone in a number of cycles. In our cases, normally we do it in 3 consecutive cycles. So what does it mean when we say social labs are social? They are social because they address a complex social challenge that are not to be solved by a technological fix What does this mean? We think that certain social problems are to be experimented with by addressing them as social, as opposed to technological. They require a transformative approach that is more complex than one simple answer could offer. And the issue at hand is approached by all stakeholders in concert, negotiating their stakes as well as positions, their engagement, and their potential impact. So it is social because the problem addressed is social, because the mode of addressing is aiming at transformative social change, that is socio-operational patterns, social design and imaginaries, and also stakeholders work together in concert and they are negotiating and reflecting upon the different stakes that they may have. What do we mean when we talk about stakeholders? This has been discussed last week. Stakeholders are obviously social actors. In this specific case of a social lab, they are selected that they have a stake in the process or a legitimate interest, a valuable resource, or a risk to tackle, or the combination thereof. We believe that all of these types of actors are required to share and act in concert in a research environment. What do we mean when we say that the social labs are labs, that is laboratories? We think that social labs should offer a real-life environment to conduct social experiments. This is pretty much like a living lab. Offer the experiments that have been designed by the social lab participants themselves to be tested in one of the participants' context. And such practical contexts, for example, can be existing projects or other types of action that are aimed at some kind of social change. So they are real life settings, but real life settings in which there is a constant and combined in concert reflection on the experiment that is the process at hand. What do we mean when we talk about social experiments? A social experiment, we argue, is an intervention that is co-designed by the social lab participants and then tested within the host organization. Anyone can be a host organization, of course. The aim of the social intervention is to overcome barriers, and the social experiment, for example, can create openings that change the flow of information, the patterns of operation, the structure of governance, and the likes. Social experiments are built around a consensus of the participants. Also, they're based on a non-coercive acceptance of the host organization, the real life venue where the experiment is tested, offering the practical context to do the experiment. So this is kind of what the social lab is. I'll go back. So we started action research. Action research offers a space in which a constant action, reflection, iteration of the research process is practiced. Social labs are one such space. There is a co-creation and co-design of a social problem. There is a co-creation and co-design of an experiment. And then stakeholders are invited in this co-design, co-creation process to reflect on the experiment at hand. And such experiments are triggered and aimed at reaching some kind of change within the host organization where such an experiment is concluded. The example that I want to share with you comes from a project we've been doing. It's called New Horizon. I'll talk about this in the next tutorial. This was a major RRI project within the European Commission, involving 19 such social labs. I'll show you. The objectives were aimed to foster the integration of RRI into European, national, and local research, innovation, practice, and funding. We have been organizing 19 social labs and co-creating pilot actions. These are the interventions or experiments. We have been developing a societal readiness of technology. I'll show you that in the next tutorial. We wanted to raise awareness of RRI, best practices, and we wanted to provide results of how to better integrate RRI into the next European framework program, also create a network that will, should, may do this. So we looked at the whole of the research funding arena of the European Commission. And this is the setup of the actions of European research funding. As you see, there is the European Research Council. I mentioned previously, there is fast and new technologies, and a number of other areas like health, food, energy, transport, environment, society, security. So these are the different areas where research funding focuses. It's the totality of European research funding. And we were looking in this specific example at the Joint Research Center, which is the core research unit of the European Commission, 4,000 researchers at 4 different venues, doing research across the board. And we wanted to look at how the state of RRI is within the Joint Research Center, and also work towards change in more acceptance. So I'll show you how the process went. RRI perspective within the JRC is understood that it increases the in and output legitimacy of the Joint Research Center in the EU at large. This is coming from a 1999 document that suggests that the JRC should incorporate RRI, which it didn't too much. So we started in April 2018. We looked at the web content. We analyzed 12 documents, did 13 interviews, as you remember. First phase being a diagnosis of the state of affairs, in this case, responsible research innovation in the GRC. We also looked at an evaluation of the GRC from 2015. It suggested to strengthen social sciences and interdisciplinary work, something that is closely related to RRI, to foster gender balance, again, another area, and embrace RRI. We saw that this was on paper, but in the GRC implementation review of 2017, not much of this was taken up. There were some activities in this direction and some other activities that were countering this. So our assessment, this is the start of the process of the social lab, that RRI keys, you remember the 6 keys, are implicitly present within a number of GRC activities units and its current strategy, yet there are also part and actions that refer less to ideas of RRI. So we suggested something of a research question: what benefits can RRI and its keys bring to the GRC? So this was the research question that we came up together with the stakeholders whom we invited for the social lab process. The social lab process started with developing visions. Here you see, so it's an iterative process that not only involves discussing, but also visual images. We had different participants. Here you see the chief scientific officer looking at a drawing that is made by a researcher within the GRC. This was one of the visions, Vision 2050, walk the talk of RRI. So actually do participative research. Here's another, that the world will become a green, augmented, and connected open world. Therefore, this vision needs RRI. We then asked, what are the key challenges that obstruct, what are the key barriers that obstruct the take-up of RRI? Here is the workshop. Here you see the people. And the way it went was looking at the different keys, ethics, governance, gender, you remember them, and putting post-its and coming from the real life experience of these researchers within the Joint Research Center. Here you see some of the examples within the governance domain, balance between policy and new teams, expectations of civilization, changing political priorities within the European Commission, or the need or the hardships of persuading politicians what a proper research agenda would be. Here are some other questions. How effective science with and for society activities are, institutional framework barriers for different locations across the European Union, the prevalence of old skills and their inability to address novel approaches, or a traditional approach that works. So you see that a lot of ideas came up, also in public engagement, also in science education. So open access, so these are the keys, ethics, and a lot of ideas were generated. And this then were narrowed down. Pilots were the experiment. These were narrowed down in an iterative workshop setup to a number of potential ideas that would create experiments through which such barriers could be addressed. And you see that a lot of ideas were generated. We tried to narrow them down to a few of them. And then we took these experiments and in a voting process, selected those that the participants thought are the most important to try, and that will offer as much reflection as possible to change the social challenge at hand. So first 3 were selected, but then number 2 and number 3 were combined. So 2 major experiments were selected, and this was only the first workshop. And here is your summary. So the first workshop, which was realized in September 2018, it was actually organized in collaboration with the GRC. The idea of mainstreaming RRI was widely embraced by participants. They have repeatedly addressed the example how stakeholders and citizen engagement was core to what they were doing. However, most of RRI challenges were understood as governance related. So probably this stems from the governance needs of such a large institution, that is the GRC. Surprisingly, in the voting process, and this is the interesting element of such a social lab setting, it was interesting that while most of the challenges, as you saw the list, were governance challenges, the pilots hardly touched the questions of governance, but rather mainly addressed public engagement. This was seen probably as a more feasible task in practice. So they realized tacitly probably that governance is not a stakeholder related issue to be changed, because this is a pretty top-down institution. The research is commissioned and run. Governance is controlled by the European Commission, that is the government of the European Union. So agency is not located with the stakeholders to change governance. However, they may be able to change public engagement activities. This was seen as more feasible. And there were intense debates and revealed, of course, different understandings of how science should be governed within the GRC. However, the pilots were designed and the pilots started, and the pilots were conducted, the experiments. Reflection in a second workshop took conclusions, and the final intervention that came out of this social lab was an internal regulatory practice with a guidebook, which meant that each and every research project had to take up certain elements from the guidebook in RRification of the specific research activity. This guidebook and the regulation, the internal regulation, has been accepted just a few months ago. So it's yet to be seen that the 4,000 different researchers actually take up the results of the social lab workshop, and whether this will result in true social change that we aspired to. So this is what I wanted to tell you today. I will stop sharing my screen and I'm all ears. Any questions, comments? As I don't see raised hands, Anu, please help me.
Okay. I also don't see any hand raised, but
that means that everything was extremely clear, perfectly understandable.
So I have a question. Okay, Ashish, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know regarding how the specific process of learning is different from, the real world context, and if there are any divergences, or whether, the real inspires the lab. So, if you get my question.
Not exactly. Could you repeat?
I said that I would like to know what are the mechanisms of learning that we are referring to in the social lab context, and to what extent do they have the real world context in them?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think both elements are extremely important. One, the knowledge generation. The knowledge generation is twofold. One, it's traditional social science, mainly mixed methods, and this is the diagnosis part. So there should be a baseline within every social lab to bring traditionally generated knowledge about the subject or the topic at hand through mixed methods. And there is, as the action research method calls it, there is substantive learning to be involved. So there should be a baseline of understanding the state of affairs across the social lab participants. And once there is such an understanding, then the iteration begins. How is it real life? The experiments are real life. So there is a constant move in and out of the lab, in the sense that there is a reflection phase in which the state of knowledge within the lab helps create an experiment. That experiment then is taken out to a real life context, and I'll give you some examples. And then the observation that took place in the real life context is taken back into the laboratory, which is a space which is rather a workshop, and participants reflect from the viewpoint of the diagnosis, key aspects of the diagnosis, their different stakes, that is, their different perceptions of the social practice at hand that they want to change, and redesign the experiment based on such observations, do the experiment again in the real life context, bring it back again to the workshop and to the stakeholders, again reflect on it, and do a third experiment. And that will then hopefully give you the mechanics of change that is assumed to be generalizable and reproducible. So this is kind of the process. It's an in and out process from the workshop space to the real life context, and then coming back to the workshop space to reflect on the state of affairs and also on the experiment. Anup, you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, my question is that social labs is useful for the qualitative research or quantitative research?
Well, this is action research, mainly qualitative. However, you may, and I think that in most of our cases, the diagnosis part involve quantitative elements as well. So the baseline can use very traditional social science research, quantitative or qualitative or mixed method. Bring that knowledge into the social lab space, and then it's action oriented. So it's neither quantitative nor qualitative, but it's rather action oriented. So you develop an experiment that you think will help or show trajectories of social change. Do that experiment, and I don't want to speak in metaphors. For instance, in one of the social labs we're doing, we have understood, this was about quadruple helix, for instance, with the Austrian railway company. The Austrian railway company does extremely many research projects, but mainly they're done by engineers and they're mainly technological. And they were asking us, how can we open up our research and innovation activities to bring in different stakeholders? Since they had the Austrian railway company had a space, they thought that they'll create a co-working space in which they invite all their partners, technological companies, consultants, that can then rent a space in there, an office, and then the railway company would animate the collaboration of these entities and people. And they asked us, is this a good approach? And instead of saying yes or no, we said, why don't we do a social lab together with these stakeholders that you want to invite and come up with a shared understanding of what needs to be done in order to make this effective. And the social lab process came up with the idea that instead of a space, we first need to create a shared process and a shared understanding. So instead of a shared physical building that the Austrian Railways were offering, we need to create first a community. So they created together, and this was the experiment, they created what they call community creates mobility, with inviting a varied group of people who have then suggested to create what they called learning journeys to understand the core stakes of mobility in Austria, in which obviously railways are involved and engaged. Then on second iteration, they came up that if the community is run and managed by the Austrian Railways itself, then the problem definition will always be what's the role of rail and the railway company within the much wider potential spectrum of understanding mobility in Austria. So they redesigned the community in order to create a management board, of which one was only delegated by the railway company and others were elected members. Then they said on second iteration that if the money for the community and the learning journeys come from the Austrian Railways, then the Austrian Railways has still too much influence on what's going on. So they should try to do crowdfunding or co-funding of the different entities. So they put up not much, but some money to manage the community. And this is where we are now. So something that started out from the idea of let's create a space, let's invite different entities, and they will collaborate for the betterment of Austrian mobility and for aiding the innovation activities of the Austrian Railways, was transformed based on the social lab process into an independent, extremely agile community that not only informs, as it is now, the innovation activities of the Austrian Railways, which it does, but also Austrian government is involved. A number of entities are also involved, from Siemens, manufacturers of trains, to a number of other small and large entities, non-government organizations, etc. So I think this is an excellent process and an excellent example of how different such a social lab process using action research is from a traditional research. We could have been commissioned, our institute could have been commissioned by the Austrian Railways. We probably would have done our quantitative and qualitative research and would have suggested something that would have been probably different than the original idea, but also very different from the end result that is now this community, which actually works quite well. Okay.
So I have another question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we heard about makerspace or innovator space. So is the social labs also aligned with those ideas?
Partly. Obviously, there is a lot stakeholder-oriented and change-oriented methodologies out there. Maker spaces are rather innovation-oriented venues in which different knowledge holders, lay people included, get access to certain technologies that they would not have access to because they're too expensive or not available, whatever. So this is also obviously a space where different stakeholders could engage, but it is innovation and not social change oriented. Also, there is no requirement to work including all different stakeholders together. You can go alone to a makerspace and do stuff with the machinery that is there, which you couldn't buy at home or which would be too big to use at home, etc. And this is obviously the assumption of a makerspace, that while you're doing so, anyone can approach you and tell you things that would help you make that innovation better, for instance. However, in the social lab process, as said, much of the activities have to be done in a consensus. This is a very consensus-oriented exercise, because otherwise, if people feel, certain stakeholders feel that they are coerced into accepting certain trajectories, then they'll just leave the process. Then we don't care. This is not for us. So one of the benefits, we think, of the action research that is done in a social lab is that the iterative process of reflection and action requires a lot of the consensus, and therefore a lot of breaking down the power hierarchies that are to be found in other settings. Because otherwise, those who feel that they're repressed, they just don't show up. And interestingly enough, this is a great process because, it is up to the community, whoever the community may be, to see whether that type of knowledge that is repressed or included is actually required. So it does not necessarily mean that everybody should stay on for the whole process, because it could be that certain stakes or certain contributions that are felt to be extremely important in the first place may turn out to be not such important. And therefore, you will let them go. Not a big problem.
Sir, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Sir, in the context of our country, India, there are so many multi-strand social problems in India because we have a rich legacy of civilization and traditions. So we can say that diverse social status or culture is widespread in our country. When we think about the social lab, now, sometimes the experimentation, after the experimentation, the result would be beneficial to the some part of the society, or it may be not beneficial to the other part of society. But this is the diversity of culture or civilization. How to put that result in a uniform way or in an inclusive way in the context of India, because it is not inclusive in that way. So what would be the strategy in the context of India while we experimenting in the social lab?
I think this is an excellent question. Thank you for it. Let me contradict in one element, and this is the complexity of India as opposed to other parts of the world. I think everything is every location and every social problem is extremely complex. And maybe complexities are of a different kind in India than in other places in the world. But the whole idea of action research and the social lab is that certain problems are what is called wicked problems. And wicked problems are of a specific type. I think it originates in a paper written in 1973, saying that certain problems are of a very different nature than benign problems. Benign problems are problems which have a core, which have a causal logic to them, which have a solution that is clear, and potentially they also have a temporal understanding of how this solution should be taken up and then job done. Wicked problems, on the other hand, are not only complex, but they don't have a solution. Neither do they have a specific type of temporality in which you can declare that the problem is solved, nor is the causal logic unilinear or linear, but it is complex in the sense that there are multiple types of causalities at play at every one moment. Social labs and such action research endeavors are good to address such wicked problems. Biggest wicked problem today is climate change. Climate change is extremely complex. Climate change doesn't have a starting point, doesn't have an end point, doesn't even have a solution. And I'm pretty sure that there are many of these kinds of problems in India, but rest assured, there are many such problems elsewhere. In a perfect world, social labs would be constant. And I think this is something that I have not mentioned, that because there is no final point in the social change and the iteration, I think many of the potential social labs actually are continuous processes of social labbing, in which the reflection, experimentation, reflection, experimentation cycle is continuous. Wicked problems are of a nature in which by a few experiments, you cannot find a solution that then could be distributed and should be then generalized. And I think that's also one of the criticism against action research, that, okay, you do experiments, a number of them, you reflect on them, and then you have a local solution, but how can you generalize? And one of the answers to this criticism is that you don't. You continue experimentation and application and reflection and application and experimentation. And I think this would be the case, I would suggest, for the social problems that I assume you have in mind related to India. I don't know if this is a good enough answer.
Yes, sir, I got your point, what you want to say.
Thank you. Okay, guys, I don't want to take up much of your time.
So one thing is there, but if you have time, I have a presentation for the Saturday's that classes. So
can we maybe do that, because the technology is such unfriendly today, and I'll
okay,
ask our IT people to look at what might be the problem on my end. So maybe we can do that and start with that tomorrow morning. And
okay,
then,
okay, that can be done.
I can also reflect on it, because I'm not sure that I will be able to follow your presentation, although I would want to have it. So
No, only
okay,
5
so
minutes.
how about we start it
So tomorrow morning I will have 5 minutes that report on the Saturday sessions. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that wonderful lectures and also that practical aspects of social labs explaining very well. And also thank you all participants for the questions you raised and interactive sessions you attended during the Kahoot session. And see you again tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. So goodbye for today.
Thank you very much, Anup. Thank you, and sorry for the technical problems from my side. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.